Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I have a wonderful guest with us. Her name is Erin Persley. And Erin is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and producer. Her work aims to tell compelling personal journeys that connect disparate communities. Erin's films include Living Inside Out, exploring prison reentry from the perspective of three women in the San Francisco Bay Area, and Empowering the Yard, which examined an HIV peer education program in an Oklahoma women's prison. Erin currently teaches film courses at San Francisco State University and College of San Mateo. She is working on a feature documentary entitled Human Shield, a film centered on abortion clinic escorts and volunteers who put their bodies on the line to protect vulnerable patients from harassment at 3 US clinics. In fact, that's how Erin basically got connected with us, is that she heard our episode called What It's Like to Be a Clinic Escort, which was episode 72 that aired originally on November 10th of last year. So, Erin, thank you so much for being on Madness Cafe. We're excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with both of you. It's great.
First of all, tell us a little bit about yourself, but then how did you happen to start making this particular documentary?
I don't know if you've heard this, I don't know if it's an adage or sort of a saying, but documentary filmmaking is kind of like a marathon. So it tends to have a really long life. So there's this project particularly took a long time for it to come to where it is now. Yeah, I'm based in San Francisco, California. I originally grew up in Florida, and I was always sort of drawn to documentaries and storytelling. So I really wanted to tell stories about real people. I love watching all kinds of movies. Like I was just telling my nephew, who I was babysitting yesterday, he wanted to watch the new Top Gun again because he's really into airplanes. But so I watch all kinds of movies, but I was really drawn to documentaries because I was really connected with talking about stories about real people you can relate to. And I always found it really compelling to find people who look like just you and me, who are everyday people who are doing really heroic and really compelling and inspiring things. So that sort of brought me into documentary filmmaking. And then I've mostly centered a lot of my films, as you mentioned in my bio, around women's stories, female perspectives. It's not that I think films that tell stories from other perspectives aren't as good or aren't as necessary, but I feel like it's really impactful and important to sort of think about things from a gendered and female or non-binary perspective. And so I've done a lot of work with women in prison, women in reentry, a lot of criminal justice, but I've always had a really deep connection to reproductive rights. Myself, I was someone who went to protests when I was in college, really heavily involved with what was happening around abortion access long before this film started. And then basically came across a blog post written by a clinic escort. Her name is Lauren Rankin. She actually wrote a really fantastic book on clinic escorts, which just came out last year. She was an escort in New Jersey, and she talked about her experience. I think it was posted in Huffington Post and also like republished in a couple other sites. And it just was like this really, I don't even know how I found it, to be totally honest, but it was just really inspiring to hear her talk about this idea of self-sacrifice and humanity, and like this idea of being this quote unquote human shield. And I think I just was looking for an inspiring story. There's been a lot of dark things happening in our world recently, and I think this perspective actually brought a lot of hope. And so I was really sort of drawn to it, and then decided to sort of learn more. And that sort of pushed me along into making the documentary on clinic escorts.
So how long have you been working on this particular film?
Yeah, how long has this marathon been going on for?
Yeah, because I didn't think of it as a marathon, really.
Yeah, it's exhausting, but in a great way, but it's long. So I actually originally found the article and was sort of like, I don't know if you ever go into like a digital wormhole where you like find one thing and then you great. So then you spend like hours on like the random sites and you go here and you go there.
Yeah.
So I think it was sometime in 2017 where I found the article and I just was sort of like looking up things. And then 2018 is when I really started to push to talk to with Lauren and then some of the other escorts. So it's been since 2018. Of course, 2020 was like a crazy year because I had planned on doing so many things, and then, COVID. So 5 years and counting.
Wow.
Is that common that working on a documentary will take that long?
It's a great question. I think for majority of documentary filmmakers, it does take multiple years. I
Okay.
think it depends on what kind of story you're telling. There's a film called Always in Season, follows three stories of three Black men who were lynched in the South. And that
Oh,
woman spent 10 years making her film. I
Oh,
think part of it
wow.
was because it was a
wow.
long story. She was looking for funding. And then I think also she, she had a life to live and she took a long time to sort of
Of
do this in
course.
her free time. So I think it depends. But I would say most documentaries take at least a couple years, definitely longer
Mm,
than what you're saying in like a major, movie theater or a major Hollywood film.
wow, that's really interesting. It's funny because when I was younger, like I don't know, like a kid, high school, college, right around then, I originally thought that I would write a book, but then it sort of morphed and I thought, it would be really cool to make a documentary. There's so many interesting people in the world. There's so many interesting stories that really need to be told. I'm so excited to talk to you and get sort of a bird's eye view of what it's like in that whole process. So I kind of feel like I'm getting a chance to live vicariously through you, just
I
see
love
what it's
it.
like to
Yeah,
make a documentary.
perfect. Obviously, every project's a little bit different, but I think it always starts with something that's interesting and inspiring. Every
Mhm.
filmmaker, I think it's some sort of inspirational moment where they meet someone, they read something, they see something. I think that starts the journey. I think the biggest thing is always finding something that you think can stand the test of time because you're going to be
Mm,
working on it for years.
Oh,
right.
As you
yeah.
mentioned, I teach as well, so I'm balancing teaching, working in the film. I do some freelance stuff, so you're wearing like a bunch of hats. So it's like what's going to keep you inspired and motivated, and then I think what's going to also get you excited about coming back to. And
Hmm.
those because there's some low moments in filmmaking and just like any kind of creative process where you're exhausted, maybe you're a little bit overwhelmed and you sort of think about like can I keep on going, and you need to have something in that topic that's going to be like, yes, I'm committed to this, I want to tell a story, it's really important. You probably could be a great documentary filmmaker. You seem like you have a lot of passion. That's half the battle right there.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I get to do a little bit of that, or I don't know, a version of it with our podcast.
Totally.
We get to put a spotlight on other people's stories and give them a platform to tell their stories. So,
I
So
teach
you,
like a small podcast, sorry, episode in one of my classes because it's all about audio storytelling. So I
mhm.
totally think that you guys are storytellers. You're both,
oh,
you're doing great interviews, you're meeting people. Yeah, you're sort of enlightening the world about interesting things that they wouldn't normally know about. So I would
Oh,
totally say you're filmmakers. You're halfway there.
thank you, Erin. I love
I feel so
that.
good.
Pat on the back for us, Jennifer.
You said that you need an idea that's inspiring, passionate to you that can stand the test of time. I barely have to ask because I feel like I'm inspired by your film. But what is inspiring to you that's keeping you going on this project?
When I first started making the project, really, I realized I only knew sort of what I was reading in articles, and that obviously doesn't tell like the full story. So I thought, okay, I need to spend a good chunk of time just talking to people. And as you both probably do a lot in the podcast, you talk to people, it's really easy, you make it really informal, make everyone feel comfortable. And so I just did like months and months of phone interviews with escorts. And it
Mhm.
really was, I'd meet one escort group and then they would refer me to another escort group. And it was sort of really organic, very grassroots, where I was
Mhm.
talking to people, escorts of all ages, all backgrounds, all ethnicities, and in all different areas. And I was still, living in San Francisco, so I was doing it, and this was also through sort of early Zoom and audio and everything. So it was great just to meet people, hear their stories, and through hearing their stories, I thought, wow, there's definitely a film here. Because I
Mm.
will say I have a whole sort of folder of things that I think are interesting, and I always think, like, can this be made into a movie? And so you don't know in the beginning. But the moment I started talking to escorts all over, I thought, oh my gosh, this has to be told. And I've seen a lot of abortion related documentaries. There's been some
Mhm.
fantastic films made about certain providers and certain clinics,
Right.
even like some of the legal aspects of some of the most recent trap laws, which are all
Right.
fantastic. But I hadn't seen anything really focused on escorts. And I was like, wow, these people are doing this and they're doing it all over the country, in blue states, in red states, in urban, in rural. I mean, and this is like, multiple shifts a week, every week. This is just consistent work. For me, what was so interesting is how do you balance doing this type of work where you're volunteering to stand in front of a clinic for hours through all
Right.
Right.
sorts of weather. I was talking to escorts in Arizona where they would put like ice packs in their bra because it was so
Oh
hot.
my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you had like escorts, especially the group in Toledo, Ohio, where they're like freezing and they're figuring out ways to stay warm. Some escorts don't use umbrellas, so they'd be standing in rain, just in raincoats, just like covered, in downpour and water, and just thinking through how can you do this? What keeps them going? And they would always tell me that always about the patients. For them, it was like if they can stand there for 3 hours and they could help one patient get to the clinic safely, like that was enough. And I just thought,
Wow.
like, wow, it was just so inspiring. I thought there's a moment where the actual escorting is so short. It literally is like 30 seconds,
Hmm.
but you're doing it for these really brief moments of sort of bringing some calmness and some serenity to people who maybe are having a rough day or just need someone to know that like what their decision is okay. Providing a little bit of either mental or emotional support. And like I said, I just
Wow.
think that type of like self-sacrifice was really inspiring. And I wanted to sort of show that there's different people involved with the sort of abortion movement, that you don't have to be someone going to a protest. I mean, you can be, but you can also be someone who's maybe a little bit quieter, maybe someone who's more mild mannered, who can decide just to put their body, use their physical space to like help someone out. And that's what's so interesting about escorts is they have all different types of backgrounds. You can find someone that you can relate to really easily in terms of like personality. That's super helpful for the general public to sort of hear and see.
That's really interesting because we've talked about before on various episodes that there's different ways that people can get involved with issues that are important to them. It doesn't have to be that they give a lot of money or that they write a bunch of whatever, or if they're nervous about it, they don't have to call a representative. They can do something like
Yeah.
this. They can be an escort and be a safe space or help to provide a safe space for other people.
I think that it allows people to find an entry point wherever they are, right? So the people who you're mentioning are very scared. It's like, oh, I think I can do this. And you try it once and then you sort of figure out where you fit in. And it's not a cookie cutter type of, sort of commitment, which I think is also really great.
Did you feel like there were common themes that ran through the people that you talked to, things that they felt or endured, or things that seem universal that brought people together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm trying to think. The groups are so diverse and
Yeah.
even individual or there's like what I thought was most interesting is that you talk to like let's say a woman in her 70s, and I would talk to like a college student, and so you think about like seeing this space where you can have people of multiple generations doing the same thing. I think that the most common thing is really this idea of like harassment and bullying, like that you couldn't stand by and sort of be a bystander anymore. Even some escorts who I think who were a little bit nervous about what that would entail, they thought like I have kids or I have family, and if someone did that to someone I knew, I would be really angry and I would want them to have support. Some escorts who I wouldn't even say are pro-abortion, they would say they're pro-choice, but they maybe have different views on abortion themselves. But
Mhm.
they all really felt like harassment and bullying around a medical decision was wrong, and that everyone deserved a safe space to make a decision and to feel comfortable. And that what was happening in front of clinics was outrageous. And I think that's the biggest thing is I think the general public doesn't really know how bad they are. It doesn't know how
Yeah.
consistent it's happening. And I think there's a lot of moments where it's really eye-opening for new escorts who think, oh wow, I thought this was only happening in certain states or certain areas. And it's
Hmm.
really everywhere.
In choosing which clinics to focus on, I'm really interested in that part of the
Yeah.
process. Like ballpark, how many different clinics did you talk to? And then how did you narrow that down to the three that you're focusing on for your documentary?
I think I spoke to over 100 escorts, and I'm going to say around 30 states, give or
Wow.
take. It kind of
Wow.
changes, but yeah, which is pretty amazing. Out of those escorts, it was a combination of a couple things. I wanted to focus on different clinics with different layouts. That was the one thing that I
Mm.
thought was really interesting is depending on the layout of the clinic was really how many obstacles escorts were really facing. So there were some
Okay.
clinics, like the clinic in Hagerstown, Maryland, it's the entrance is literally 2 steps and there's a sidewalk. The escorts and the protesters and the patients and just regular old people are all sharing this very small sidewalk with parking meters and these huge signs and everything else. And so you got
Oh,
a sense of the distance and the space was really extraordinary. For me, also, Maryland's a really interesting state because they've been one of the few, and I guess they're not really considered a southern state, which is interesting, but the mid-Atlantic states that are really
right.
putting in abortion legislation back into their state law. So they're sort of seen as a little bit of a sanctuary, at least for the moment. I thought there's a state where they're supporting abortion rights, but then there's this clinic in this one area of Western Maryland that's being bombarded with mostly out of state protesters, but also there are sort of, because they're this westernmost state or westernmost clinic in Maryland, they're getting so much out of state patients, out of state protesters. And it's a way for them to sort of connect with these other states that are really getting restricted, beyond belief. Ohio, and I started focusing on the Toledo clinic. Ohio is a really interesting state in terms of state politics. It's done a lot of really crazy things. And I say that coming from Florida, and Florida's a state. So I feel like I have a little bit of, yeah. And I say that because I was born in Georgia, but I grew up mostly in Florida. So I'm pretty much a Floridian. Ohio's just gone through this crazy arc of it was sort of this blue collar, a middle class space, and it's gone really extreme and really conservative really fast. And
it patterns itself after Florida.
I know, which is so interesting to think about. I mean, I don't think it's any longer a purple state. I think it's, if we're thinking about politics, it's definitely red. And so Ohio's in this really interesting area because obviously Illinois is also becoming a really great space for abortion and reproductive rights. And they're sort of in this area that is changing so much of that Rust Belt, in terms of the last couple of elections. There's been so much changing in that area. And for me, Toledo is just a really unique area, but for the clinic itself, the parking lot wraps around the clinic. So protesters have to walk up and down the sidewalks and they can't stop to block parking spots, which of course is really problematic. And then they just recently have purchased the parking lot across the street. So they use that parking lot to potentially misdirect patients to park there. And then they have free range to sort of talk with them as they're figuring out where they're going. It's just, there's a lot of things. And then this one clinic is the only clinic in Toledo. So it's sort of serving a really important purpose because the rest of the clinics in sort of southern and central Ohio, they're hours and hours away. And so I thought there's a little bit of both the location of the clinic and the actual community. And then the last clinic I'm following in Raleigh, North Carolina. North Carolina is also in this really interesting space where it's this right now, and I want to knock on wood, but I don't have any wood around me. But right now, it's one of the few southern states that's really having some access to abortion, to abortion access. And I'm curious to see, because I've just been reading about how this last midterm, apparently the state legislature brought in a lot of Republicans and a lot of really conservative, a lot of what they're calling pro-life Democrats. And so they're really poised to be another southern state that's going to lose access really quickly. And North Carolina, the clinic that I'm following, they get protesters coming in from Love Life, which is a national organization that gets parade permits. And they bring in 400 to 500 protesters at each clinic. And they have what they call youth marches where they bring their kids. And you'll see kids as young as babies, but even toddlers, 2, 3, 4 years old. And they bring them in every Saturday to do these what they call Christian youth concerts, or I'm sure they have a different wording for it, but basically they try to bring in guitars and make it a musical family fun activity, but you're crowding 400 people in a very small space where the clinic is right there. Raleigh has just really had to deal with a lot of new escorts, or a lot of new protesters, some of them even coming in from Alabama and Mississippi once Alabama and Mississippi lost access. The abortion landscape, I could talk about this for hours. It's changing so rapidly. I mean, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow in terms of the latest legal battles. Through the years that I've been following these clinics and these escorts, you can really see how the shifts in who's protesting, how much money they're getting to protest, who's backing them, and then also the state politics, as well as where patients, the influx of patients has really been really eye-opening.
What changes have you seen since Roe was overturned?
I was talking to, advocates in the space, reproductive rights space, and I was asking them, way before the leaked opinion, but when they were actually just hearing the argument in December of 2021, I was asking them, where do you see this happening? Do you think that's going to get overturned? And everyone was like, yes, unfortunately, we think this is happening, and we're preparing for the absolute worst. So I was really following through 2022, the first half of the year, the first 6 months, of how they were mobilizing for sort of preparing for the worst. They were very much, I think, physically prepared, a little bit mentally prepared, but they think the emotional preparation was a little bit harder to deal with. And so the day that Roe was overturned, I was filming at all 3 clinics as well as in front of DC. And it was an incredibly emotional moment. And I've sort of seen since that date how much the clinics have changed. And really, Ohio, the clinic that I'm following in Toledo, the Toledo Women's Center, the day that Roe fell, the day that Roe was overturned, their 6-week ban went into effect immediately. So that,
Wow.
June 24th, they had like, I think it was a couple hours before they just got notice that it went into effect. Since then, it's gone through several ups and downs in the courts. So it had an injunction and it was lifted and it was injunction again. So right now they are able to do abortion access up until 15 weeks, but it's taken a long time. And I think the clinics in Ohio are really preparing for that to go back into effect, for the injunction to be lifted and for abortion access to be limited after 6 weeks, which is basically gonna put that clinic out of business because they can't stay
Right.
open with that. So I think clinics are gonna look at, crossing state lines and maybe moving to Michigan, because
Mhm.
Michigan just passed some protections in their state constitution with the last midterms. So I think for that escort group, they might either shift where they're escorting or have to sort of think about if they could actually make the drive into Michigan to do escorting there. North Carolina has gone through, and just what I've seen the last 6 months, they've gotten more protesters. Escalations have happened. So like there was a protester that tried to run over an escort in Greensboro, which is both, I think, escalations and violence. I think the protesters are more emboldened. I think
Yeah.
they see this as a huge, victory, and they want to go even farther.
Yeah.
And of course, you're seeing more and more patients who are desperate, trying to figure out what they have access to. It's
Right.
super confusing as someone
Mhm.
who I think, reads these updates every day. And I think if I was a patient, I would be totally overwhelmed about not knowing where you could go, what you could do.
Yeah.
Can I look up abortion access on my computer? Can I message it on Facebook? Are they going to use that against me? I mean, there's a lot of really intense intimidation happening right now that I think is really scary.
I think it's interesting when you were just talking about the escalation, and then if you refer that back to the title of your film, Human Shield, tell us a little bit about why you picked that, but also listeners, think of what that means in your mind. These people are putting themselves on the line.
For me, I always think about this idea of like, for a lot of us, we don't have a lot of resources. All we have is sort of our physical selves. And to be able to physically put your body in a space where you can offer protection for someone else, to me is like the greatest gift. I know it's a little bit cheesy, but like such a
Yeah.
self-sacrifice, such a like
Mhm.
an act of
Absolutely.
compassion, because you're really saying that like I don't know who you are, you might be a stranger to me, but I'm going to sort of make a space with my body so that you can get somewhere safely. And I thought this idea of like the human shield as ways we as humans, we as people can really start thinking about how we could actually offer protection, but also connect with other people who maybe are not like ourselves. Um, I don't know if you were following during the Standing Rock protests, where there were a bunch of indigenous groups that were fighting for the Standing Rock for the
Yep.
pipeline.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people, there was a bunch of former Vietnam veterans who decided they were going to go there and create a physical barrier, who are also
Right.
sort of using their bodies as like a physical human shield. And that was really impactful and provocative to think about. These are vets who, fought in wars and really seen some really intense violent acts. And they were literally putting themselves in the most combative, aggressive space to offer some peace. And then
Right.
I was reading about, there was a group of moms, I think it was Moms Against Violence. I forgot their exact acronym, but it was during the Black Lives Matter uprising and protest in Portland. And it was a group of white moms and dads who decided they wanted physically, because they sort of acknowledged their acts as, with white privilege, to physically
Mhm.
put their bodies protecting people who were protesting against police brutality. And it
Right.
Yeah.
just was all these really inspiring moments where you're thinking about like this, like taking like the biggest leap of saying like, I'm going to put myself in space in potentially harm's way because I want to protect you. It really rang true for me. I think there's not a lot of people who associate hope and inspiration and compassion when they talk about abortion. It's so polarizing right now, and so for me, it
Right.
was a way to say like, yes, we can never get rid of the politics of what abortion is, but we can think about ways to really come together as people. And I'm not delusional that I think that people are going to watch this film and say all of a sudden they're going to be like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm going to support abortion rights. But I do think there's a way you can connect with people on a real basic level. Showing that sort of humanity in becoming that human shield, to me, it was really impactful. Although I should say, who knows if the name of the movie will change? But for the moment, I would
True,
say
true.
I find that really as a way to sort of talk about abortion in a different perspective.
You kind of touched briefly on what you hope the impact of the film was going to be. And I did want to talk about that a little bit. You're not putting it out to make pro-life people suddenly say, okay, we're in support now.
I don't think I'm thinking that the film is going to change people who are staunch in their opinions if they're against abortion. But I do
Right.
think there's like a huge section, I'd say majority of the US, there's a huge, even probably around the world, there's a huge section of people who are kind of in the middle who have varying opinions on how they feel about abortion.
Yeah.
Often when I talk about the project, many people will say to me like, oh, I believe in the choice for abortion, but I wouldn't have it myself. And I always try to say to those people, I understand what you're saying, but when you put that stigma, like I wouldn't have it myself, you sort of make it a negative connotation. So instead of
Mhm.
saying that, you just open up the space that I feel like everyone should have the choice to have an abortion, whatever their choice may be. So I'm thinking that I want the film to really attract that middle section of people. There's a lot of people who are living in the US who have conflicted views, who are not really sure, who don't really know a lot about what it means, who maybe might vote or support a politician who might vote for an abortion ban, but they don't really know the ramifications of that abortion ban sometimes. So I think
Mhm.
that's really where I think that the film can make a huge impact. And I think it also could make an impact talking about how we are like within our own community, because a lot of this harassment and intimidation is happening in these smaller neighborhoods. And people will be driving by. Maybe you're going to McDonald's to get something for your kids, or you're driving to the grocery store. You turn around, you see in a clinic or you see a space, and there's a bunch of these crazy signs and people yelling, and you're like, what's going on? And I think having some education around what's happening, I think could be really impactful and really important. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that some of those people in the middle might have a thought around what does it mean to have abortion access, and that it's not about your choice, it's about the choice in general and what that means for the greater good. And I think also just having more discussions around abortion can never be a bad thing.
True.
Just having us use the word abortion out loud, talk about it, really be open, I think is always a positive step in the right direction.
Very
Yeah, I
true.
think I'm one of those people. I said many times that statement that you said, I'm totally pro-choice, but I would never have one. But then when you hear that, when you really hear that, what I'm saying is, I would never do that, but you go ahead.
Mm.
And then also this whole idea of intimidation, that's a whole nother step. And we're seeing that in communities all around the country, not only in the abortion clinics, but around book banning, school board meetings. In fact, one of our local school board members is talking about leaving the school board because of the threats against her and her family. They have been so outrageous.
Oh.
It's such a winning tactic for their side, because now I'm afraid to get the medical procedure that I need and want. Now I'm afraid to go into the school board and say, my kids can read whatever they want. Human shield against that intimidation is incredible because, okay, yeah, you put yourself on the line. What about your family? What about your kids? What about your neighbors? It's a scary thing.
There's a level that intimidation is like, how far will it go if you don't take a stand now? As you're saying,
Right.
like it could take away everything. And so, I work with other filmmakers who are working on like stories around trans youth or other things, and you sort of think about where do we sort of say that enough is enough. And so, I think you're absolutely right. The intimidation is also interesting because these escorts are doing it. And of course, they might take breaks, from a couple months here and there, but they're committing to doing this for the long haul. I think because they know this isn't about just doing it for a month and saying, okay, I'm tired. It's like you have to really realize that until the protests in front of the clinic, until the harassment, until intimidation stops, until potentially police are willing to enforce some of these buffer laws and some of these rules around clinic entrances, that they're going to be as dangerous as they're ever going to get, and they're going to get worse. And so it's sort of like, taking that step forward just to sort of being there in front of the clinic, I think is a really important moment for them, but realizing that it's not just one moment, you have to stay with it. It's almost like they're committing for that marathon as well in terms of the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah, like what we talked about in episode 72 when we were talking to two clinic escorts is they truly are, in a lot of instances, taking their lives into their own hands to protect people who are trying to access the clinics and trying to access procedures that they still, for however long, still have legal rights to. I think it's really important what you're doing, Erin, in that you're putting the spotlight on the people in the middle. I mean, literally in the middle, because we hear a lot about the protesters, we hear about the people who are trying to access the care, and then we hear about the clinics. And I don't think we talk enough about the people who are, as you're saying, acting as human shields. And I would hope that people would hear that and think, okay, maybe I shouldn't be as violent in my protest of the clinic because, oh, there's a person there who's, who's trying to protect somebody. I would hope that would, and I just realized I just showed how incredibly naive I am about stuff like this, but and how bleeding heart I am. But I would hope that somebody, it would touch their humanity, but unfortunately, I don't think it does in enough cases.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the escalation is, like, as you mentioned, it is quite violent. There's a moment where I was filming with one of the escorts in Toledo, and Kristen was one of the escorts, and she was looking up this one protester that was there the previous week, and it turns out that they had connections to like a ton of white supremacy and domestic terrorism groups, and what you start to realize, the more you look into this, is that the Venn diagram of people who are, who
It's all
are
connected.
Yeah, it's the same hate speech that you're seeing against abortion clinics that you're seeing against all these other groups. And some of these local militias and some of these other smaller groups that are really wanting to disband, democracy, that want to go to January 6th and storm the Capitol. And, they're all the same people. So I don't know if I feel like those people are ever going to temper down their aggression. But what I do think could happen is there's a level where we realize that there are always going to be fringe groups that have these very extreme views. And potentially maybe we can never reach out to them. But like I said, there's these people in the middle. There's tons of even local politicians who could do more to protect these clinics that they're doing. I mean, just in the 5 years I've been filming, the clinics have been arsoned several times, just the ones I'm following. So just the 3 clinics have been arsoned several times. The clinic in Raleigh, they had a protester who brought a gun to the clinic and then shot himself in the leg. I mean, there's been some real, like I said, there's been protesters who try to run over other escorts, protesters that have tried to, or antis who try to like storm the clinic doors and do sit-ins. And this is, again, just within the last couple of years. We as citizens, as a community members, as whatever you want to call it, it is sort of our responsibility to sort of know what's happening and realize that this violence is spreading everywhere. I know that we're always thinking through like mass shootings and sort of this really intense way around gun control and gun violence, but the violence that we see at these clinics is, again, getting worse and worse, and really can I think it can be resolved, can actually have protections that it could be put in place. Part of what I hope the film shows is that it is kind of our responsibility to do that. Like, we as voters, we as community members, sort of figure out what we can do, whether you want to volunteer to be an escort, whether you want to go to a school board meeting or a city council meeting and sort of stand up for your local clinic. There's ways that you can actually make it safer. And that to me is like a real practical solution to some of these really intense problems.
Those are really good points. I think those are good to think about. I mean, I wouldn't have thought about that. Oh, why don't I go to a city council meeting and talk about ways to make the clinics safer or to protect the clinics? I never would have thought about that. So thank you for saying that.
I think it's really important to not let the intimidation make us silence ourselves.
It's also important for, I think, groups to come together. I mean, there's so many of us that I think we are frightened a little bit when we see that certain groups are being targeted. I think is also what's so inspiring about these escorts is they know that they're potentially in a place of danger and they're doing it anyways. I remember one of the first times I was filming outside one of the clinics, I was talking to the cinematographer that I was working with. It was just the 2 of us. And I looked over at her and I said, listen, our number one priority is to keep each other safe. If at any point you feel unsafe, feel uncomfortable, like, let me know, because we are in a dangerous place and we are filming, and even bringing the camera to the clinic could exacerbate or, excite some of the protesters. They want to perform for the camera. They want to show up, put on a good show. And so I let her know, like, hey, like, we need to make sure we're safe, and then we need to make sure the escorts are safe. So like, if I see anything I think that looks, let's pull back, let's make sure we diffuse anything that could be really incendiary. And I think it's hard because I want to capture the story because it's so important for it to be told, but like, you have to balance your own safety with that. I think escorts are, balancing their safety with their work too, because they have been, like I mentioned, these clinics have been threatened before with bomb threats, and they have to sort of think through, how do you sort of cope with that kind of intensity and trauma, but then how do you sort of go there the next day and still keep coming back? And I
Yeah.
think it's really hard. And we're all human, and we worry, and our partners worry for us, and our parents worry for us, our kids worry for us. That's what I think also makes escorting such an amazing sort of volunteer commitment, right? They're just doing this out of, again, their everyday lives because they want to sort of stand up and they don't want the intimidation to win.
They're heroes.
So yeah, I mean, it sounds a little bit corny,
Yeah.
but I totally feel that
They're
way.
heroes.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
you're a hero for doing the documentary.
Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you. For me, I just want to shine a light on what people are doing. I think that's all we can do as people, right? Is to help tell more
Yeah.
stories, help get more visibility.
Yes,
Well-
but if our listeners can hear anything, we cannot let them intimidate us into silence. It isn't the books, it isn't the abortion, it isn't any of it. It is the desire to control
Power.
what we,
Yeah.
it won't stop with the books. It won't
No.
stop with abortion access. It won't stop.
Yeah.
We can't be
I mean,
silent. I feel very passionate about this right now myself.
No, it's good. I think if we can all empower each other to sort of stand up, even when we're feeling a little bit scared, to keep on doing it. I think that's great. I mean, I think that's maybe the biggest thing to learn from some of these moments where you feel the most stress is that, to not stand by, not to be a bystander. I think not to assume that someone else is going to take up that fight, that you need to take up the fight yourself.
So I'm wondering, Erin, we're talking a lot about how there's intimidation and violence and people trying to use these tactics to control us and silence us. Have you yourself, as a documentarian, and especially on this particular project, have you come under any attack for the work that you're doing with us?
Yeah, and so the one thing that when I started this project, I thought a lot about this idea of, when you make a film, you sort of become somewhat of a public persona, in the sense where, like, it's no longer me looking this up on my computer at home. Now I'm gonna finish the film, I'm gonna show the film, and the film is gonna have its own life when it's done. So I talked a lot about it with my family and my partner on, my own personal safety. So for me, it's thinking through around digitally, online, where can people find me? I teach at a college, so I'm somewhat of a public persona in that sense, where I'm on the website, you can find me pretty easily. And so I think it was sort of coming to terms with that people can find me, and they have. So I have gotten some messages on social media before around disapproval of how some protesters are being displayed on some video, or angry that I'm there, or thinking that I lied to them, or that I'm manipulating them, which of course is all incorrect and false. Because I always sort of remark that when I go to the clinic to film, I just film you doing you. I don't re-edit anything. I mean, of course I edit it, but I don't manipulate it to show you in any different type of light. So if you want to act the way you want to act, I'm merely just going to capture it on camera. When they come at me with a lot of these really aggressive tactics, it's because they're realizing either that they're going to be shown in negative light, or maybe what they're doing isn't right. Who knows? So yeah, I've had to think a little bit about my own personal safety. And I think the biggest thing for me is just making sure that the escorts are safe. So what material, what details do I need to hide from the public around where they live? For one of the escorts I'm following, she has 3 small children, and I've been following her since she was pregnant with her 3rd. So I've basically, he's almost 5 now. Wow. So I've been basically following them their entire lives, but they're little, and and what does that mean to have them on camera? So I think it's making sure that they feel comfortable. And then I think even with the crowdfunding campaign that I did last year, I was pushing out a lot of information around who was on the crew and what we were doing, and we were, different quotes from different escorts. And I got a whole new flood of emails and messages from anti-abortion groups that were, using various language to try to get me to stop making the project. It is scary at the moment. I'm not going to lie. You get a little bit of hesitation.
Yeah.
And I think even when I'm at the clinic, I've had people follow me from when we're filming at the clinic, follow me back to wherever we're staying, or follow, if we're getting lunch, follow us back to the lunch spot, and try to use intimidation. And I think the biggest thing that I've sort of realized is if they don't see me sweat so much, then I think that it shows that it doesn't really affect me, and sort of keep a little bit of that fragile nature to when I get home behind closed doors. But I can't stop, because of this film has to be told. I've committed so much time to these escorts, and I want their story to be out there. And I think the more and more that I can be public about what I'm doing, the less power they have over me, the less a little bit of intimidation. And I would also argue that, like, there's so many aspects of our lives that we could be potentially in danger, going to the grocery store, going to
Right.
movie theaters, unfortunately,
Yeah.
teaching in a college. So I think it's hard to say like what's more dangerous than something else. But you also don't want to be, I guess you don't want to disregard some of the more intense threats. And there are some of the
Of
escorts who
course.
they're in contact with the FBI, and so they'll ask me, periodically, do you have anything that you want us to report? And I usually say I'm good. But it's good to know that you have these outlets where you can, if you need to. Sorry, there's a little bit of a tangent there, but I was thinking through this ideas around safety.
No,
No,
it's
that's
so
great.
important.
Given the nature of not just this particular documentary, Human Shield, but the other ones that you've done, Living Inside Out and Empowering the Yard, there's such a trust issue because there's such sensitive and very important, but also sensitive topics. How do you get people to trust you and to open up to you and then to allow you the access that you have in order to tell these stories in a way that they deserve?
Yeah, the trust building is like so crucial, which is why I think it takes me so long in the beginning, because I never want to start a project and people to think that I'm like swooping in and going to take advantage of their lives or sort of misrepresent them in any way. So I think, yeah, it's a lot of trust building. It's a lot of, I share something about myself so they
Mhm.
know who I am and they share a little bit about themselves. I usually do a lot of phone calls. We're just kind of talking informally. I take little notes on my computer, but I don't use the notes or anything in particular. And then you move from like talking on the phone, and then you say, hey, maybe can I record you on Zoom for a little bit and to get you feeling comfortable? And then you say, okay, can I come visit you in person? I won't bring a camera, but you can just see who I am in person. And I can just like hang out with you for a day or two. And then you go back and you say, okay, I'm going to bring a camera and it's just going to be me and one other person. And the two of us are just going to be here and we're going to film you for a little bit. If you feel uncomfortable, let us know. We'll stop at any time. And then you sort of open up a little bit more and more. And I think it's sort of giving them out so they can say no, right? You don't want anyone to feel like they
Mhm.
can't voice their concern. I'm earning their trust little by little so they don't feel like it's all or nothing. And they learn a little bit about who I am, which I think helps. So I don't become just like a voice or a face and sort of I have like no background. For the films about the women in prison, that was even more challenging because I only had sometimes 20 minutes with each of the women in prison to like
Mhm.
communicate with them. And we would write letters back and
Mhm.
forth in the beginning, but it's really trying to get them to understand like what my motivations are for the film. That there's so many ways that these things can be very salacious. I should also say I used to work on this TV show where it was all about making sort of true crime very salacious, very like exciting. You wanted to get as many viewers to watch as possible. And so those types of programming is one thing, but the types of films I want to make, I want people to like lower their guard a little bit and trust me. And that is all about like, hey, we all make mistakes. I'm not about here to like judge you or to sort of think through why you're here, but I just want to I want to get to know you as a person. And the prison was really important because I'm not from Oklahoma. I hadn't really been into Oklahoma before. So I didn't want them to think that I was coming here from California and going to be like, here's this like West Coast liberal gonna somehow, judge them in their Oklahoma ways of life. And I was like, no, Oklahoma's beautiful. There's some great areas, and I want to learn about the community there, and I want to learn about what women in this space, and particularly in Tulsa, have to deal with. So I think that was part of it, acknowledging that I don't know everything. I don't know everything about everything, and so I want to learn from you. For the escorts, what I also realized was there was a lot of like news reporters or TV reporters who would come in for like a day or two, who would like
Mhm.
fly in for a story, or a news reporter, or even someone who wrote a magazine article who would come in maybe for 3 or 4 days and then they would be it. And that was it. And I was like, no, I'm here for the long haul. Literally, I'm going
Wow.
to be here for months. During COVID, when I couldn't film with them, I was Zooming with them. They had like birthday parties on Zoom. We had happy hours on Zoom. Like it just was like saying like, hey, like I really care about you. We've made this sort of relationship. But also, it's strange because you make a movie about someone and it's like you feel like they're part of your life in this
Mhm.
very unique and strange way. But you also know that like there's boundaries that you want to respect. So it's like it's a complicated process. I think every film is a little bit different, but you want to like make people feel like they have some boundaries and they have some protections, but also just like there is some vulnerability that you both have, which I think is really, really good. It makes the film better, I think, hopefully.
Mhm. Wow, that's really interesting. So I'm in the whole process part of this,
Yeah.
thought now. So you talk about how you'll meet with people and you'll record them and And I'm thinking there's got to be some times that you're filming somebody and maybe that person or that particular film or part of the film won't end up in the finished product.
Mhm.
How do you work around that? Like, how do you tell people, yes, I recorded you for this and we had this discussion, but in the finished product, that part doesn't necessarily appear?
It is a little complicated because, you know, I think when you think, oh, I'm gonna be in a movie, from that point of view, you don't really know what's involved. I
Yeah.
think many people don't realize I'm gonna be doing this for, you know, multiple interviews, multiple months. So I think it's also like getting a little bit of education around like what my process is like as a filmmaker, which is might be a
Okay.
little bit different than someone else's. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm gonna film people, you know, and I'm still filming. So there's a chance that I could film something tomorrow and it doesn't make it into the finished story because, you know, I can't keep, I can't, I guess I could make like a 45-hour movie, but I have a feeling that would be less inclined for people to see
You
it.
you
Yeah.
and Ken Burns.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if only I can get the money that Ken Burns gets for those
Right?
epic baseball, yeah, 7-part films. Anyhow, it'd have to be an hour and a half to 2 hours, give or take. There are things that are going to be fantastic. What I always tell everyone when I ask them to sit down for an interview is like, even if this doesn't make the final film, what you tell me is incredibly important for the storytelling as a whole. Like you telling me about your story helps me make a better movie. You know, it does inform what I think about it. It does make me think about things that I have filmed previously or how I'm going to shape the story. And it's hard because if you're making a film, like an archival film where maybe it already happened and you're telling an
Hmm.
event that happened 20 years ago, you already know from A to B what the story is and you're just filling in pieces.
Hmm.
But for this film, it's observational, it's a verite film. So I'm just filming as things unfold. And as I mentioned, things are all crazy right now. They're all over the place. So I have no
Right.
idea what next month is going to, you know, hold me. So I film a little bit and then something changes and I'm like, okay, well, I guess that doesn't really fit right now. For instance, I remember for a while I was filming a city council member in Toledo, and I wasn't quite sure how he was going to fit into the story. It doesn't seem like he might fit into it right now, but you know, who knows what's going to happen in 6 months when that story
Hmm.
changes. So and I think just making sure people know that I appreciate their time. Like if you sit with me for an hour to 2 hour interview and you let me come to your home and put up lights and set up with a team of people, that is a little bit of a letting your guard down, but it's also like I don't want you to feel like you're getting violated. So I think just letting you
Right.
know that I appreciate it and that all these little pieces, who knows, maybe they go into like an educational impact campaign after the film is released, even if it doesn't make the final
Mm.
film. Maybe it's on lives on a website as a little bit of like a moment on about this. Like this these videos could be really crucial for like the life of the entire movie even if it is not in the actual physical movie. So I
Got it.
hope that helps. I mean, we'll find out once
Yeah.
the film is out and then you can interview some of the escorts who weren't in it and you can see what they say. It's fun
Exactly.
too.
That's awesome.
Exactly. How do you know when a project is done? And
Yeah.
how do you know when you're like, okay, I need to start putting this together and then make it into the finished product? How do you just stop yourself from just going, I'm just going to keep filming people every day for the next 8 years
Yeah.
until some resolution happens and things are all hunky
All
dory
good.
and fine?
Yeah. When I started this film, I knew that there was not going to be a clear resolution. It's not like all of a sudden one day abortion access is going to be, you know, put into law and it's never going to be challenged. So like it's always going to be something. I think for me is thinking through how the story feels like it fits, but also for the individual clinics, what's their natural ending or where do they sort of see it feeling a sense of accomplishment, and then also the individual characters. But that's why you bring in other people, you bring in producers, you bring in other crew members who can sort of say, hey, this is a really strong moment here. They can give you perspective because right, because I've been doing
Mm.
this project for so long, I'm like immersed in it. And it's hard for me to pull myself out and be like, okay, where is the bigger picture in all of this? So you collaborate with other people, you sort of allow people to sort of give their own perspective. Yes, you could film for, you know, decades and decades, but I want the film to come out because I want it to be part of a movement and part of some of the discussion. So I think that's part of it, what's going to motivate me to finish. I'd love to have it finished for the next presidential campaign. So then that could really
Mm.
be the election. So we can sort of see how that fits in. Who knows where that's going to go with stuff. I don't have a finite deadline. So I could go for a year or two, depending on how things move. I think it's going to be really all about where I feel like I'm getting a full picture of what's happening. It's never going to be totally complete, but I want the viewers and the audience when they watch it to feel a sense of I guess not resolution, but have a sense of like what the next steps might be. So like
Hmm.
so for instance, this clinic might have to close at one point, but what's going to happen in this area, and how could you get involved?
Hmm.
Or if this clinic escort group is going to get a buffer zone pass, which would be amazing, how can you help get that enforced? I'm feeling like we're reaching a somewhat of an end soon, but I guess you have to ask me again in about 6 months and see how I feel
Okay.
then. But yeah, there's not a clear, like, no one says like whoosh, you're done. Like there's not a documentary fairy who can like bop you on the head and be like it's over. I wish that would be amazing. Like it willed into existence. You're gonna have to sort of figure it out and then trust your gut. I mean, that's sort of part of what I've learned is filmmaking is a little bit about instincts, and you sort
Mhm.
of you get a sense of where the story is going. You get a sense of who might be a good strong character for the film. You get a sense of sort of where to go, and then I think you also get a sense of like, okay, this feels really important, and I think this is a great way to sort of have that moment. So I guess we'll wait and see once my gut tells me that I should wrap up soon, and then I'll listen to it.
You're a beautiful storyteller. Just the way
Oh,
you
thanks.
describe that is amazing. Is there anything that you wanted to leave with our audience about you or your film or the human shields?
Most of it is just to think about, well, I guess be kind to people. That might seem like a silly thing to say out loud, but to be kind and be
No, it's not silly at
and
all.
be a good human. I'm referencing, I just was watching my nephew the other day, and I was telling him about how he was mad at his brother, and I was like, you know what, even though you don't like your brother today, like you're gonna love your brother in about 5 years from now, and if you're kind to him, that bond that always stays strong. So aside from brotherly love, I think it's really important to sort of to be empathetic. For me, it's all about, documentaries are all about putting yourself in someone else's shoes and seeing the world from their perspective. So I want people to have an open mind and approach abortion rights and abortion access from that same sense of empathy. I want them to be open to watch this film and to sort of think about what it makes them think and feel about. Again, we mentioned this idea of intimidation or bullying, that this type of aggressive behavior, like the people who are pushing you through peer pressure or through intimidation or through violence, they have their own motivations, but that you need to stand up for what you believe in. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing is we as people, as community members, need to protect each other, and we can't
Mhm.
wait for someone else to come in. You need to be your own hero, and you need to sort of stand up for what you think is right. These escorts are great role models for what that looks like, whether you're pro-choice, pro-life, somewhere in the middle.
Thank you so much, Erin, for doing this, for putting yourself out there and putting in the time to shine a light on not just issues, but also the people within those issues. Taking the time to actually, like you said, almost become a part of their lives and get to know these people and know how these issues aren't just like this big nebulous idea, but that there's real people behind them, and then putting that out there to help remind the rest of us that there are real people behind all this. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Please, please, please continue doing it.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you both for, again, the more visibility we can get on these topics, these people, these stories, I think are great. So you're doing the work as just as much as I am. So I thank you for keeping up the podcast and trying to help share stories about people who are doing, amazing things for the world, for women, for women's rights, all those things.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
our pleasure
And
for sure.
absolutely. And keep us posted on all the different milestones, Human Shield, so that we can continue to help get the word out, because once it's a done deal and it's out, we're gonna want to see it, and we're gonna want to hype it up for you, and we're gonna have you back, and we're gonna
Have a
we
watch
want people to
party.
see it, have a watch party. We want people to see this. And by the way, people, go and see Erin's other documentaries as well. Like, support women filmmakers.
Yeah, I love that. I think I would love to have a whole come back here and speak about the film. I mean, I want the film
Yes.
to be shown at, libraries and community centers and religious centers and synagogues and churches. Obviously, movie theaters are fantastic, and I wanted to get seen, there too. But I think having, and bringing some of the escorts with me so they could talk about their experiences
Oh,
and
that's
you can learn
awesome.
about local resources. I think that'll be a great way for us to really think through what you can do yourself in your local area.
Perfect. Yeah,
Thank
we're here
you.
for
Thank you
it.
so much.
You're
Thank
very
Appreciate
you.
it.
welcome. Thank you,
All right.
Erin.
Thanks so much.
That was so good. I love what Erin said about you need to be your own hero. That is fantastic. Like, I think I need to, put that on a plaque. We have to stand up for ourselves and for our communities, and we can't be bullied into inaction.
There's so much bullying going on right now.
Yeah, it's like it's the main mode of operating for huge swaths of people. And we can't let that continue. And I think the work that Erin is doing is bringing a light to, hey, this is not okay. We cannot let this continue. There are real people behind this, and we need to stand up to the bullies and stand up for each other.
Yeah, when she mentioned you're out and about in the community and you drive by a clinic and you see the people on the street, maybe with their signs or whatever, which I have seen many times and hadn't actually given it much thought. In
Mhm.
my mind, before we talk to the heroes before and before we talk to Erin, I thought, oh, they're protesters. Who cares? I didn't really think about the fact that there is someone trying to get a medical procedure that they
Mhm.
need. I didn't really think about the thought that there might be an escort putting their body on the line to protect the person. I
Mhm.
didn't think about the medical people who are also getting harassed and bullied for doing their job and providing services. I didn't think
Yeah.
about any of that. I just saw these people with signs and I was like, oh, I don't agree with them.
Yeah.
But I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything because it didn't occur to me that there was a
Yeah.
whole structure and process going on here.
Hmm.
So
Well,
I
and to be fair, we all are in our own lives, right? We're going about our day to day, and we
sure,
see something and we think, like you said, oh, I don't agree with that. That's awful. But then you're in your car and you're driving, and you're like, I need to get to where I'm going.
sure, but I don't agree with the book banning. And
Hmm.
yet the people banning the books are threatening our school board. They're
Hmm.
threatening rape, they're threatening violence, they're threatening hurting their children.
Yeah.
They're threatening these things, which will then cause people to back away and say, so if I just drive by and I don't notice and I don't pay attention, then in some ways I let those threats continue.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. I do. I do.
I just
And
think the awareness is such key because I drove by those signs, never thought about it. Then we talked to Midge and Cupcake. Now we've talked to Erin. And I'm like,
yeah.
oh, we have got to pay attention.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not only pay attention, you can't drive
We
by
have to
and be
do
like,
something.
we have to at least use our voice. We have to put signs up. We have to say something. We have to be a counter protest because if we're not,
There's strength in numbers, right? So not only do we have to, put up the signs and go to the meetings and do the things, but we need to show that there are people in support so that other people who are
exactly.
possibly afraid and thinking, oh, I don't want to do anything, but then they'll see, oh, but there are other people there who I'm not in this by myself. That's where documentaries and Erin's documentaries in particular, and even more specific, Human Shield, that's where those come in, because
Exactly.
those are the reminders that you're not in this by yourself. We're not in this alone. There's more to it than people are being awful and for trying to prevent people from doing whatever. There's a community of people trying to protect each other and trying to be there for each other. These are the reminders. I mean, I could watch like 10 documentaries a day. I mean, I love documentaries. Sometimes you think, well, why are there so many documentaries about X, Y, and Z? Well, that's fine. Let them keep coming. Let them continue to be made, because the reminders need to be there. People need to be reminded that these are issues that need to be addressed, and these are things that are important for people to know about and to think about and to act on. Keep them coming. Support your small independent filmmakers. Go to the film festivals. Support people who are doing this kind of work. People who are putting years of their lives into these projects and highlighting these amazing warriors and heroes. I mean, the least we can do is support the filmmakers and go see the films.
Human Shield watch party.
Yep, we're doing it. We're gonna have Erin back, and yeah, I love it. I'm so excited for this. So excited for the work she's doing.
Yeah, me too. Bye, Raquel.
Bye, Jennifer.
Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.